The rain in Seoul does not fall gently. It arrives the way every bad thing does, without warning, without apology. And by the time you understand what's happening, you are already soaked. Adise had learned that the hard way. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when her life cracked open for the second time. She was cutting through the alley behind Gangnam-gu Medical Center, the way she always did on night shift. It saved 7 minutes, and in 12-hour ICU rotations. And 7 minutes was the difference between eating and not eating, between sitting and continuing to stand upright on legs that had been asked to do too much since before the sun rose. She had her nursing badge still clipped to her scrubs. Her sneakers squeaked against wet asphalt. Her earbuds were in, one out, one in, the way her mother had taught her. Always half listening. Always half ready. She was not ready. First, the footsteps behind her stopped being ambient noise and became intentional. Second, the alley narrowed without her noticing how far she'd walked. Third, when she turned, slowly, carefully, the way you turn when you already know, there were two of them. Large, unhurried, carrying the specific kind of silence that men carry when they are certain they will not be interrupted. Adise pulled her earbud out completely. She was tall for a woman, 5'8", so broad-shouldered in the Nigerian way that her aunties had described as made for work, and she had reframed as made for this, apparently. She had assessed patients coding on tables with less adrenaline than what was moving through her body right now. She backed up 1 step, 2. Her heel hit a wall, the one behind her. There were 3 of them. The man on her left said something in Korean she didn't fully catch. She had been in Seoul for 14 months, and her Korean was functional. Medical, careful, not street, not this. What she caught was the gallery, and she was there. And the word for mistake. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Not because she was weak. Adaeze had never been weak, not once, not even when weakness would have been the reasonable thing. But because the rational part of her brain was running calculations faster than language could keep up with, and all the calculations said the same thing. She had no help. The man in the center stepped forward. And then, a sound. Not a shout. Not a warning. Just a voice. Low. Quiet. The kind of quiet that costs something to maintain. The kind of quiet that belongs to a man who has never needed volume, because volume is for people who are not certain they will be obeyed. 1 word in Korean. Meum chweo. All 3 men stopped, like marionettes whose strings had been cut, and then, simultaneously, pulled taut by different hands. They turned. Adaeze turned. He was standing at the alley entrance, not the one she'd come from, which meant he'd come from somewhere else entirely, which meant he'd known about this alley, which meant something about this situation was larger than she had understood a moment ago. He was Korean, early to mid-30s, not especially tall, perhaps 5'11", but built with that particular density that speaks not of the gym, but of decades of inhabiting a world where your body is either a weapon or a target. And he had long ago made his choice. He wore a dark suit the way armor is worn. His hands were in his pockets. He was not moving quickly. He was barely moving at all. And the 3 men who had pinned Adaeze to a wall were backing away from him. The tallest one said something, explanatory, defensive. The suited man listened without expression. Then he said 5 words and turned his head slightly, and one of the men took out his phone. Adise watched them call someone. She watched the call last exactly 40 seconds. She watched all 3 men leave, not running. The suited man turned to her then. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they are genuinely uncertain about, not with hostility, not with possession, but with the careful attention of someone deciding what something is before deciding what to do about it. "Are you hurt?" he said. in English, accented, precise, unhurried. Adise pressed her back against the wall that was still behind her. Her training said, assess the new threat. Her training said, danger has a new face now. Her training said 100 things, but what her body said was, your hands are shaking. No, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was unreasonably proud of that. He looked at her hands. She looked at her hands. Yes, she corrected. Something moved through his expression. Not a smile. Not quite. But the small, acknowledging shift of a man who respects honesty even when, especially when, it costs you something to offer it. You work at the hospital, he said. Not a question. How do you know that? He looked at her badge. Walk to the main street, he said. I'll be behind you. I don't know you. No, he agreed. You don't. A beat. The rain, the neon reflection stretching on wet asphalt, like something trying to be beautiful despite the circumstances. But those men won't return tonight, he added, and you want to reach the main street. He wasn't wrong. She hated that he wasn't wrong. Adise pushed off the wall, squared her shoulders, and walked. He was behind her the entire way. She never once heard his footsteps. She asked around, carefully. The way you ask things when you suspect the answer will require you to rearrange your understanding of something. His name came back to her in pieces, the way dangerous things always do. Not in one clean revelation, but in fragments, like a broken window you piece together only after you've already walked through it. Kwon Ji-hoon, 42 years old in public records, 36 in reality, which said something about the kind of paperwork that followed certain men. CEO of a holding company with 7 subsidiaries and an art acquisition portfolio that put him at roughly every significant Seoul cultural event in any given quarter. And, underneath all of that, the way a river runs underneath ice, the Kwon organization. 17 years old, 7 districts, a reputation built not on cruelty, but on something she found more unsettling. Consistency. He did what he said he would do. Always. She found this out not from one source, but from 3, and none of them looked comfortable saying it. Well, one of them, a pharmacist near her neighborhood who had lived in Seoul his entire life, said it while looking at a point approximately 3 feet above her head, as though the information was safer delivered to the air. I don't understand, she said to Dr. Cho, her supervisor, on Thursday afternoon in the break room, with the kind of casual precision she had perfected over years of extracting information from resistant patients. He just let me walk away. Doctor, Cho was quiet for longer than the question warranted. If Kwon Ji-hoon wanted something from you, she finally said, you would know. What does that mean? It means be careful, Adise. She used her name the way Koreans who genuinely liked her used it. With care, with the small labor of the unfamiliar syllables. And also, a pause. Don't be rude to him. Adise stared at her. Both things, Dr. Cho confirmed, and left. He appeared again 4 days later. Not at the hospital, not at night. At the bookshop near her apartment in Mapo-gu, the small English and Korean one that smelled of old paper and the particular loneliness of Saturday mornings, spent alone in cities that do not know your name. She was in the foreign literature section. He was in the Korean poetry section, which was 3 shelves away and around a corner, and she didn't see him until she turned, and there he was, reading or appearing to read, which she already suspected were different things with him. He looked up. Nurse Adaeze, he said. She felt the whole architecture of her composure require brief maintenance. You know my name. It was on your badge. This is my neighborhood, she said, which was not quite an accusation, but occupied the same territory. I know. He looked back at his book. It's also a public bookshop. She stood there for a moment, processing the extraordinary ordinariness of him, standing in a bookshop on a Saturday, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know, completely unremarkable except for the way the other customers gave him a radius of space without seeming to decide to, the way water naturally parts around a stone that has been there long enough. She took the book from the shelf nearest her without looking at the title and went to the reading chair in the corner. He said nothing. She sat. He remained where he was. 40 minutes passed. She read 3 pages and retained none of them. When she finally left, he was still there. He didn't watch her go, or if he did, she didn't catch him. She looked at the book title in the street. She hadn't known she'd picked up poetry. She didn't put it back. The third time, he brought coffee. She was on a 12-hour shift, and he appeared at the hospital's ground-floor cafe, not in the ICU, not near anything restricted, just at the cafe, at 6:45 a.m. So before her shift started, with 2 cups and the particular stillness of a man who had decided to do something and was simply doing it. "I don't know what you take," he said, setting both cups on the table across from where she was sitting. "Black is on the left." She looked at the cups. She looked at him. "You followed me here. I knew you worked here. That's the same thing." "It's not," he said. "But I understand why it feels that way." He sat down. Not across from her, beside her, at the side of the table, at an angle that was not confrontational, but was not distant either. A careful geometry. The geometry of a man who has spent decades calculating exactly how much space to occupy. "Why are you here?" she asked. A pause, long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "I wanted to know if you were all right," he said. She looked at him. 4 days later. "I was occupied." She thought of 3 sources who had looked at their shoes. She thought of a pharmacist, and a point 3 feet above her head. "Mr. Kwan, Jihoon," he said. "I'm not going to call you that. You'll adjust." The certainty of it. Not arrogant. Certain. There was a difference, and she was beginning to understand it. She took the black coffee, not because she trusted him, because it was 6:45 a.m., and she had 11 hours and 15 minutes still ahead of her, and the coffee was there. "Thank you for the alley," she said. "That's all this is." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "All right," he said. She wasn't sure she believed herself. She had not come to Seoul by accident. This is important. People say they stumble into new countries, a job opportunity, a change of scenery, the vague sense that somewhere else might be easier. But Adise Okafor had not stumbled anywhere in her life. She was 31 years old and had been precise about every decision since she was 15. And she had chosen Seoul the way a surgeon chooses an incision, with knowledge, with deliberateness, and with an understanding that some cuts, made correctly, allow things to heal. Lagos had been the wound, specifically, Emeka. More specifically, Emeka, and the 3 years she had folded herself smaller and smaller to fit inside a relationship that he had stopped tending the moment he realized she would stay regardless. She hadn't stayed. That part she got right. But she had arrived at the decision 3 years too late, and the version of herself she'd recovered was correct in most dimensions, but carried a scar in one specific place, around the area where a certain kind of trust had lived and no longer did. The trust that powerful men could want something from you that was not your compliance. The trust that being chosen by someone formidable meant being seen by them, rather than acquired. Zamordi. She had applied to Seoul for the nursing fellowship because South Korea had the best cardiac ICU training protocols in Asia, which was true, and because it was as far from Lagos as she could get without leaving the continent, she still called home in her chest, which was also true, and because Emeka would never follow her here. That last reason she did not write down. But it was there. She had rebuilt herself in Seoul with the discipline of someone who understands that rebuilding is not glamorous. It is 5 a.m. Korean language audio on the commute. It is making one friend at a time, slowly, the right ones. It is understanding that your foreignness will be visible here, always, that your blackness will be the first thing in every room before your competence catches up, and choosing to walk in anyway, every day, without apology, without shrinking, and because the alternative is a life spent in the hallway. She had not been built for hallways. Seoul had taken her seriously. That surprised her more than anything. The hospital had taken her credentials, her 12-hour shifts, her Yoruba English-Korean mind that switched registers mid-thought, her patient mortality rate that was lower than the department average by a margin her supervisor had stopped trying not to mention. She had been taken seriously. And then, a man with his hands in his pockets had materialized in an alley and made her hands shake, and now everything was slightly rearranged. He did not pressure her. That was the thing she had not accounted for. She had prepared, in some back cabinet way, for the version of him that made demands, that appeared at her door, that leveraged her immigration status, or her job, or her general smallness in the hierarchy of Seoul's invisible world. That version she had a response to. So that version she had survived before in different forms. This version brought coffee and asked nothing. This version appeared twice more in her neighborhood over the following 2 weeks, and on both occasions said little, asked one question that was not intrusive, and left when she signaled, not with words, but with the small closing of her body language, that she was done. He read her signals with the attention of a man who has spent his entire life understanding rooms. She did not know what to do with a powerful man who listened. She knew less about him than she should. He had been 17 when his father died, and the organization had needed a name to continue under. He had not chosen the inheritance so much as been chosen by it, which is perhaps the most honest thing about power. It rarely waits for your consent. He had spent his 20s building what his father had left, chaotic into something with structure, with rules, with a particular code that, according to Dr. Cho, delivered sideways over hospital paperwork, people in 7 districts would tell you he had kept. Not perfectly, but consistently. He had been engaged once, 6 years ago, to a woman whose family had operated in parallel circles. It had ended in a way that people who knew him did not discuss directly, but that could be inferred from the shape of certain silences. He carried it the way certain men carry things. Not visibly, not dramatically, but structurally. The way a building carries a repair. You only see it if you know where to look. Adaeze was a person who knew where to look. She had spent 11 years reading patients who couldn't speak. She was beginning, despite everything she had promised herself, to read him. Her name was Soyeon, and she arrived in Adaze's awareness the way very intelligent, very composed women always arrive in the awareness of other women, gradually and then suddenly, and with the specific quality of presence that forces you to take an honest inventory of yourself. She appeared first in the background of a photograph, a charity gala at the National Museum that Adise had attended with colleagues, and that had made its way into a society column she never read, but that one of the nurses had left open on the break room tablet. Soyeon in the background, midnight blue qipao adjacent gown, posture like she had never once been uncertain of her right to a room, nor standing with the particular ease of someone who has been photographed since birth and has decided what her face does in cameras. Standing near Jihoon, not beside him, near him. The specific topology of people who know each other in the deep specific way of shared history. Adaeze had flicked to the next article without pausing. She met Soyeon in person on a wet Wednesday at a fundraising exhibition for a children's hospital, an event Adaeze attended because the hospital organized it, or because Dr. Cho asked her to represent the ICU unit because she had said yes before fully understanding the guest list. Soyeon came to her. That was the first thing. Not Adise to her, Soyeon to Adise, crossing a gallery floor with the measured deliberateness of someone who has decided to do something and is doing it. And she held out her hand and said, in English, that was excellent and slightly formal, "You are Nurse Adise. I've heard about you." "From whom?" Adise asked. A small smile. "I architectural, constructed for effect with real materials." "Seoul is smaller than it looks," Soyeon said. She was 34. The daughter of a former minister, educated in Seoul and Geneva, currently running the Korea Cultural Preservation Fund, which managed more political capital than most people understood from the outside. She was, on paper, a philanthropist. Off paper, and she was what political families produce when they combine ruthlessness with genuine cultural conviction, a person who believed completely in what she was doing and was willing to do almost anything to continue doing it. She was also, clearly and completely, still in love with Kwon Ji-hoon. Not in the desperate way, not in the grasping way, in the way of someone who had decided long ago what her life should contain and had not yet encountered sufficient reason to revise that decision. "Oh, you've been spending time with him," Soyeon said. Not an accusation, an observation, delivered with the clinical precision of someone who has decided to see what honesty produces. "He's been spending time in my neighborhood," Adise said. Soyeon looked at her with the full quality of her intelligence for a moment. "He doesn't do that," she said. "I know. Do you know why?" "No," Adise said. "Do you?" A longer pause this time. "No," Soyeon said. "Dee and I have known him for 12 years. She said it without bitterness, without cruelty, with the specific flatness of a statement that is simply true and that she had lived with long enough to deliver without inflection. Adaeze looked at her. Soyeon looked back. Two women standing in a gallery over children's hospital art, taking each other's measure with the seriousness the moment required. "I'm not interested in complications," Adaeze said. That's not what I've come to tell you," Soyeon said. "I've come to tell you to be careful. Not of him," she paused. "Of the situation he exists inside. It has edges. I've noticed. Then we understand each other." She inclined her head, a gesture that was both a goodbye and something else, something that belonged to a more formal register than the conversation warranted, and crossed back toward the center of the room. Adise watched her go. Not evil. That was what she kept coming back to. Not a villain. Not a woman in the wrong. A woman who had built her entire sense of the future around a man who had, somewhere in the last 6 weeks, started bringing coffee to a hospital cafe, which was, in some ways, more complicated. The board investigation letter arrived on a Thursday. It was formal. It was polite. It was, in the precise language of institutional machinery, devastating. A complaint had been filed, anonymous, with the hospital's ethics review board, alleging that an unnamed foreign nursing staff member had been observed entering private financial meetings under the guise of patient care. That said, staff member had been in the company of known figures from Seoul's organized criminal networks on multiple documented occasions. That said, staff members' presence at the hospital represented a reputational liability and potentially a legal one. The letter did not name her. It did not need to. There was only one Nigerian ICU nurse at Gangnam-gu Medical Center. Dr. Cho called her in at 7 a.m. She sat across from her supervisor in the small office that smelled of green tea and institutional carpet, and she read the letter in the 3 minutes of silence Dr. Cho gave her, and when she looked up, her face was controlled in the way that it is controlled when the alternative is something you are not willing to let anyone see. "I haven't been in any financial meetings," she said. I know." "I have been." She stopped. "I have had coffee in the hospital cafe with a person." Dr. Cho looked at her with that quality she had of knowing more than she said and saying exactly what was necessary. "The investigation is procedural right now. It can become something else." "Who filed it?" "Anonymous." "Can you tell me if it came from inside the hospital?" A pause. "No," Dr. Cho said. She was telling her something in the shape of that no. Adise walked home. She did not call Jihoon. She sat in her apartment for 2 hours, which she spent eating rice she didn't taste and looking at her nursing license framed on the wall, the Nigerian one, then the Korean one, 2 years of extra examinations and language credits, and 5 a.m. audio, and the specific labor of arriving in a new country and saying, "I belong here too, watch me prove it." 2 hours. Then she called him. He answered on the first ring. She told him. He listened without interrupting. Then, "I know." The words arrived like a second letter. "You know. I was informed this morning." "Before me?" "Yes." "And you were going to come to you. I was on my way." A silence, her looking at her nursing licenses. Him wherever he was, being whoever he was, knowing things before she did. "Is it Soyeon?" she asked. A long pause. "I don't know," he said. "It may be someone using her position. Or it may be someone who understands that the most efficient way to reach me is through—" He stopped. She waited. "Through people I have made the mistake of caring about," he finished. Flat. Clinical. Self-correcting even now. The words sat between them on the phone line. "That's not a word I like," she said. It wasn't meant as one. It was a tactical observation. "Mr. Kwan." A pause. "Jihoon. Whatever you're about to do about this, I am not a variable in your calculation. I am the person being investigated." "I know. So ask me. Don't move around me." Longer pause. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. She had not expected that. She had braced for management, for assurance, for the particular brand of control that powerful men deploy when they are worried and call it protection. He had asked. She sat with it for a moment. "I want you to tell me everything you know," she said. "And then, we'll decide together." A breath from the, "All right." The investigation had been filed by a legal firm with documented connections to 3 different political families, one of which had old and specific grievances with the Kwan organization. It was not Soyeon, or not directly Soyeon, but it had routed through someone with access to her professional network, which told Jihoon something about the architecture of the attack, which told Adaeze something about how interconnected this world was, and how naive she had been to think she could stand in the peripheral glow of it without eventually being touched. "This is because of me," she said. They were in his office, a glass and steel room in a building in Uito that had a view of the Han River that she categorically refused to find beautiful. "Directly because of you, yes," he said. "I won't lie to you about that." She nodded. "Can you make it stop?" "Yes." "How?" "By making it clear that attacking what is mine is not cost-free." She looked at him. "What is mine?" she repeated. He met her eyes. "That was poorly chosen." "It was honestly chosen," she said. "That's different." His jaw tightened, the only physical tell she had found in weeks of watching. The jaw, the small muscle at the side of it that moved when he was recalibrating. "I can also make it stop," she said, "by removing myself, by being no longer relevant to you." "Yes. Is that what you want?" The room, the river beyond the glass, the silence that cost him something to maintain. "No," he said. One word. but she had learned by now that his one words contained what other men's paragraphs did not. It happened 10 days later, not in his office, not in her apartment. In the small park near Hongik University that neither of them had chosen strategically, they had been walking, on which they had begun to do in the evenings, the kind of walking that has no agenda and is therefore the most honest kind. And she had stopped at a bench and said, "Sit down." He sat. She stood. "I need to say something to you, and I need you to hear it without managing it." He looked up at her. "All right." "I am not something you manage," she said. He was still. "I have watched you for 2 months now. You are brilliant at it. Managing. Calculating. And you walk into a room, and you understand it in 4 seconds, and you place yourself exactly where you will have the most effect, and you say exactly what will produce the result you've decided on, and you protect the people around you by moving them like pieces before anything can reach them." A pause. The park. A bicycle bell somewhere. The distant specific noise of soul being soul. "I am not a piece," she said. "I am not a variable. I'm not something you keep in a safe place until it's convenient. If you want me in your life, and I am not assuming you do, I'm asking you to be honest about whether you do, then I need you to want me as a person, not as a protected item, not as something that belongs to you." She looked at him directly. "If you want me, choose me openly, while I can still see you doing it." He stood up. She had not expected that. And he stood up, and he faced her, and he was, for the first time since she had known him, not arranged, not composed, not the strategic geometry of a man who has spent 20 years deciding exactly how to be in space. He was just standing there. "I'm afraid," he said. She waited. "I'm afraid of the specific thing that happens when you stop being in a room, and I haven't prepared for you to leave it. And I've noticed this for 3 months, and I don't have a tactical response to it." He looked at her with a directness that was almost physically difficult to receive, not because it was harsh, but because it was unobstructed. "You are the first person in a very long time who has not wanted something from me that I could identify in advance. You came into my life through an alley at midnight, and every time I expect you to behave the way the situation would dictate. Afraid, compliant, strategic. You do something else entirely. Like tell you to sit down in a park. Yes. Does that bother you? It is the specific thing that makes me—" He stopped, recalibrated. "It is the specific thing that makes me want to keep you close." She was quiet for a moment. "You make me want things I stopped believing I was allowed to want," he said. "A life with margin in it. With ordinary mornings. With someone who is present because they choose to be. The jaw. The small muscle. I know what I am," he said. "I have not asked you to pretend otherwise." "No," she agreed. "You haven't. But if you're asking whether I would choose you over the architecture of a life I've spent 17 years building," a long pause, "I am telling you that I am afraid of the answer, which is itself an answer." Adise looked at him in the park in Seoul, with the evening coming in around them. She thought about Emeka. She thought about the 3 years of herself she'd folded smaller. She thought about the alley at midnight, and the word meum queo spoken at a volume meant only for the men who needed to hear it. She thought about coffee at 6:45 a.m. and the Kim So-wol poetry book she'd read 3 times now. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your life," she said. "I'm asking you to stop treating me like I exist outside it." He breathed. "Yes," he said. "Yes to what?" "Yes, to what you're asking." She sat down on the bench. He sat beside her, not across, not at a careful angle, not beside. The evening came fully in, Neither of them moved. It does not look like fireworks. It looks like two people sitting in a park in the dark, deciding to stay. The Korea Arts and Culture Summit was held at the Grand Hyatt Seoul on a Saturday in late November, when the city had the particular beauty of cold air and clear skies and lighting that turns every window into a painting. Adise had not planned to attend, and her hospital had been invited because of their collaboration with the Children's Gallery Foundation. Dr. Cho had asked. She had said yes for all the usual reasons, and then spent 2 hours selecting a dress that was correct for the occasion. Deep green silk, architectural neckline, the kind of dress her mother would have recognized as the one you wear when you are reminding people of something. Jihoon arrived separately, and he was always separate at events like this, arriving in the managed way of a man who is always both present and strategic about presence. She had understood this about him now. He was never not aware of the room. Soyeon was there. Of course, Soyeon was there. Her foundation co-sponsored the event, and she wore ivory like a statement, and moved through the room with the quality of a woman who has decided that her purpose is her, and that her purpose will be fulfilled tonight. Where she and Jihoon spoke early in the evening, briefly, at the edge of the room, where the conversation would not carry. Adise watched. She did not go to him. She was at a table with her colleagues, drinking good wine, being present in her own right, which she had decided some weeks ago was the only way to exist in any room, fully or not at all. The incident happened at 9:15 p.m. A reporter, one of the culture journalists, had gotten something. Not everything, but enough. And enough to come to Adise's table and ask, with the particular energy of someone who has decided their evening just improved significantly, whether she would care to comment on her relationship with Kwon Ji-hoon. The table went quiet. Adise looked at the reporter. She had fielded questions in Lagos traffic, in Nigerian hospitals, with 17 patients and 2 nurses and equipment from 2003. Now, she had fielded questions in Korean that she'd only half understood, and answered in Korean that cost her enormous concentration, and she had never once given an answer she regretted. "I don't have a comment," she said calmly. "There are photographs," the reporter said. "Then you don't need a comment from me. The investigation is proceeding through proper institutional channels," she said, "which I trust completely." She picked up her wine. The reporter did not leave. It was Dr. Cho who touched her arm first, quietly, just the briefest pressure, and looked across the room. Jihoon had turned. He had been 20 meters away in a conversation with 3 people Adise recognized from political coverage, and he had turned with the total focused quality of someone whose attention has been recalled from something very distant, very suddenly. He looked at the reporter. He looked at her. He excused himself from his conversation with a brief word, and 2 of the 3 people in it immediately understood that something had shifted and stepped back. He crossed the room, not fast. He never moved fast. Fast was for people who were uncertain. He moved with the steady deliberateness of someone who has decided on a destination. Soyeon watched him. Half the room watched him. Adaeze watched him. He reached her table. He looked at the reporter first. One look. The reporter, to his credit, he stayed, but he stepped back half a step in a way that was not entirely voluntary. Then Jihoon looked at her, and she saw it, the decision, already made, in the particular quality of his stillness. Not the managed stillness, the other kind, the kind that precedes something true. He put his hand out. Open. Upward. Not a grab. Not a possession. An offering. His other hand moved to the cord at his wrist. She had never asked about it, had noticed it for weeks. The dark silk with something that caught the light, something small and waited at the end of it. He removed it, quietly, placed it in his jacket pocket. She would learn later that it was a seal ring, inherited, tied to an alliance his family had maintained for 9 years, an alliance with the Han family. He had not removed it before, not in 12 years. He was removing it now, in a room full of people, in front of cameras. Adise looked at his hand. She looked at him, and she thought, this is the test. Not the investigation, not the alley, not the park at night. Whether she would take the hand of a man the room understood. Whether she would take the hand of a man who had offered it publicly. Whether she was who she believed herself to be. She took his hand and stood. And he turned, not to the reporter, not to the cameras, not to the room, to her, only to her, and said quietly, in the particular quiet that was only his, "Let's go." Not a command, a question. Yes, she said. They walked out. Soyeon watched them go. Her face was composed, her hands were still. But something in her expression, in the single moment before the composure closed back over it, was the expression of someone who has known for a long time what they feared and has just been given the confirmation. Not hatred, not cruelty. Adaeze saw it because she had learned by now to look for the things people didn't want seen. She felt, in the elevator going down, the complicated weight of being chosen and what that means to the person who was not. The rooftop belonged to a building in Mappo that Ji-hoon had kept for reasons he described once as proximity to ordinary things. Below it, a market, a laundromat, a pojangmacha cart run by a woman named Mrs. Park, who had known him since he was 22 and addressed him in a way that suggested she was unimpressed by the intervening years, which he seemed to find restoring. Adise had come up here twice before. This was the third time, and it was nearly dawn, and the sky over the Han was performing the specific act of sunrise that Seoul performs when the city has been awake long enough to deserve it. The gray lightening by increments, the Han silver then pewter then gold, the city turning from dark presence to illuminated fact. She had her jacket, a coffee from Mrs. Park below, who had pressed it into her hands at 4:30 a.m., with a look that communicated approximately everything. Ji-hoon stood at the railing. She stood beside him. No danger tonight. No rival. No investigation. No alley. No cameras. Just the city and the coming light, and two people who had arrived here from entirely different directions and had decided, carefully, to be in the same place. "Tell me something true," she said. It was a thing she'd begun asking him, not regularly, not as a ritual, but in the moments when the space between them felt open enough to hold it. He was quiet for a long time. The sky changed. "I have run this city," he said finally, not bragging, stating. "Parts of it, for 17 years. I have made decisions that affected thousands of people, and I have never once made them from a place of wanting to be understood. I made them from necessity, from strategy, from the understanding that if I hesitated, something worse would fill the space." She listened. "No, I got very good at it," he said. "At ruling, at managing, at being the person that the room rearranges itself around. And somewhere in the last 17 years, I stopped being able to tell the difference between who I was and what I did." The sky was silver now. "I have ruled a city for years," he said, quietly. The truest version of his quiet voice, the one without management in it, without strategy, just the voice he used when he was simply saying something. "But you are the first thing I ever chose." She turned her head to look at him. "Chose, not because it was tactical, not because of what you represent or what alignment you provide, because of the specific way you are." He turned to look at her. "The way you stood in an alley with your hand shaking and corrected yourself anyway. The way you sat in a bookshop for 40 minutes with a poetry book you didn't pick intentionally and read all of it. The way you looked at me in my office and told me to ask you instead of moving around you. He was not a man who spoke this way. She knew that. She understood what it cost him. I don't know how to be ordinary, he said, but I am asking you, if you are willing, to let me try to be honest. With you, inside whatever this is. Adise looked out at the Han River, turning from silver to gold. She thought about everything it had taken to stand on this rooftop, and everything she had carried from Lagos to Seoul, the nursing licenses, the 5 a.m. audio, the friendship she'd built one careful person at a time, the scar around the specific place where trust in a certain kind of man used to live. She thought about the alley and the park and the silk cord he'd removed in a room full of cameras. She thought about the things she had said, not to him, but to herself, at 2 a.m., after the board investigation letter, that she had not survived everything she had survived in order to disappear into someone else's world. She had not disappeared. She was standing here, fully, in her own green dress, with her own coffee, having made her own demands, having been met with the specific equivalent of what she had asked for. I don't want you to be ordinary, she said. He looked at her. I want you to be present. Those are different things. Yes, he said. And I will tell you when you're managing instead of being present, because you will do it. It's structural. I know. And you'll have to decide, every time I tell you, whether you want to hear it. I will hear it. Every time. Every time, he said. Not a promise made easily. A promise made from the full understanding of what he was agreeing to. She looked at the city. He looked at the city. Then the dawn broke fully. That specific moment when Seoul stops being a dark mass and becomes individual lights, and then becomes a city again, assembled, present, itself. She took his hand. Not an answer to an offering this time. He held it like a man who understands that some things, if gripped too hard, break, and has learned finally when to hold with care. The city below them did what it always did. It continued. It did not wait for them. But for one morning, they were not behind it. They were exactly where they had chosen to be. If you made it to the end, you already know this wasn't just about a mafia boss. It was about a woman who came to a foreign city carrying everything she'd survived and refused to become less of herself inside it. It was about a man who had built power around a wound so long he'd stopped knowing the wound was there. It was about what happens when two guarded people choose, deliberately, to stop being managed. Would you fight for a man like him? Or walk away the moment you found out who he really was? Where is your line? And when does the way someone treats you matter more than what they are? And Soyeon, does she become the antagonist? Does she find her own peace? Does she become the unexpected ally neither of them saw coming? Adaeze and Jihoon chose each other on a rooftop at dawn. But Seoul is a city that keeps its teeth hidden. And Han Soyeon is not a woman who accepts the closing of a chapter without deciding what the next one is. If you want it, let me know below. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that being chosen fully, publicly, honestly, is something worth asking for.